I have no great wisdom. I just have a big mouth and expensive toys, but I know we're going to have a Q&A session tonight. If anybody has a comment or question, some dialogue they'd like to have, I know we have a few minutes, and since we've all taken the time to be here, I'd love a chance to have a conversation. Would anybody like to offer up a question or comment? Anybody have anything to offer up? Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned John from Patmos.
Yes.
The island of Patmos is covered in psychotropic mushrooms. That's why it was an acid trip.
The island of Patmos is covered in psychotropic mushrooms. Well, I'll put that on my calendar, huh?
Well, you mentioned it was like an acid trip. Well, it probably was.
The book of Revelation, you know, when people talk about, I know there are people who teach whole courses on Revelation. Now, here I am sweating again. The idea that God would present his message to us, right? He has to present his message to human beings that he loves more than anything in the universe. And presenting this message, he must do so then to the least common denominator, the person least able to comprehend in the most remote part of the world. That makes sense to me. Call me crazy. And his method for communicating his message about the end times is to write a book so incredibly convoluted, whacked out, on crack, way out there, that people even thousands of years later have no idea what it means.
You're not taking the right stuff.
Apparently they're not smoking the right wacky weed. You're not an expert on this, are you? Because we're going to have to make some calls. All right, I'm just checking. Anybody else? I know I'm not that good. Yes?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I drove a very long ways to be here, so thanks for the presentation.
Thank you.
I was looking at your points about some simple questions that you wanted to ask people about when they became indoctrinated into a religion, their age, emotional vulnerability. Now, this might underscore the simplicity of the questions, but the one that I thought was the most salient was, were you emotionally vulnerable when you were recruited? And I immediately thought about the mission trips that people take to third world countries. But then I realized it's not just in other countries, it's also in my own backyard. And that things like Alcoholics Anonymous, I believe step 4 is to accept your own personal God into your heart, however you define that as yourself. I think for adults, that is the most effective method for recruitment. I would highlight that, because if you're talking to someone who's not a child, or maybe they found it later in their life, maybe that's probably how they did it.
The thing that strikes me, for those who weren't able to hear the question, and I know some people on video may be curious, he was speaking about the point being salient that were you emotionally vulnerable at the time that you converted? And we were speaking about Alcoholics Anonymous and how it is, one of the steps is that you must choose, I think you actually choose a God, right? You have to acknowledge a higher power, whatever it is, which is not to me a convincing higher power if you simply choose something. The other thing I don't like about Alcoholics Anonymous is that by throwing it off on a higher power, essentially you have taken away your personal responsibility. Action and reaction and consequence now matter less. You must rely on a higher power. And there are many, I believe, secular and sober, secular sobriety. I'm not drawing a blank, but there are secular organizations that help people recover from addiction to alcohol and drugs who don't posit that you require some sort of a higher being. It's about personal responsibility. I got myself into this mess, and here's how I'm going to get out. And people have done so successfully, and I would think that would be a far more satisfying victory.
Actually, their success rates are about the same.
The success rates are the same?
Yeah.
Well, I've read that alcoholic success rate is actually under 10%.
Yeah, neither one of them are extremely high. So.
Is it because addiction is just so difficult to conquer? Is it because, we're not experts in the field, but what I'm saying is if I can get there at the same percentage rate without believing in a fantasy, if I can do so in a reality-based method for curing my addiction, for lack of a better word, curing, beating, defeating, conquering, keeping my addiction at bay.
The same with or without the programs.
With or without a program?
Yeah.
No, well,
Isn't it?
I don't know if that's true. I know that the secular program is as effective as Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know doing it.
I had a guy call a podcast who had gone through the Alcoholics Anonymous program, and they literally told him, now this is a local chapter and they may not represent the rest of the group nationally or internationally, but they told him, choose a higher power. Even if it's a doorknob, choose something to believe in and believe in that. They were so desperate to give him a focal point outside of himself that they were almost indiscriminate. Just find something bigger than you and hold on to it. And I don't know that I consider that healthy. I think
A gateway deity.
a gateway deity. That's awesome, Justin. Yes.
Do you have anything relative to like prison conversion rates, as far as like people who go to prison and then who weren't religious and they come out religious?
I'm no expert on how many people are converted to one religion or another inside the penal system and then come out. People in the atheist community like to promote the fact that the vast majority, well above 90% of people who are in prisons, convicted felons, are religious. And that, like, I think atheists comprise somewhat, is 2 or 3%. It's below 4% of the total prison population, and that is a badge of honor. I don't know that I'm quite ready to go there. We live in a society where 90% of the American people supposedly believe in God. But if you look at the Harris studies, you look at some Pew polls that just came out in the last couple of years, you'll see that people believe in God. Belief in God covers a whole lot of stuff that is not the Christian God. It covers UFOs, it covers ghosts and dead relatives and a lot of crazy stuff that fall under the God blanket. So the next time a Christian comes up to you and they say 90% of Americans are believers in God, we're doing something right. Well, actually, they're highly divided on who that God is, and they've used a lot of sort of non-God, nebulous, spiritual material and put it under the God umbrella. But as far as people who go into the penal system and come out religious, I couldn't say. I'm more concerned about, I have to be careful here.
Is that correlate to separation of church and state as well? I guess if the penal system is, I don't know, maybe private, it might be all right, but what if it's not private? And that's the way they...
I don't...
Prisoners.
If I'm a convicted felon and they hold a church service, I choose to attend because it rings my bell in some way, then fine. I'm not as concerned about that. I'm more concerned about like blatant attempts recently to interject the Adam and Eve creation story into science textbooks in Texas and Illinois with alarming secrecy. There was an article in that girl scientists from The Guardian posted, where Michael Behe and a lot of those of his ilk had put together a textbook, and they called it something very nebulous that hopefully no one would. I don't have it. I posted it on Facebook. You can search it this week and find it. And they didn't even submit it to the science department. They submitted it to like the engineering department. I mean, they're totally doing a once around. Well, I don't mind teaching the Adam and Eve creation story if you teach it as mythology or you teach it as the education of religions, world religions. I agree with Daniel Dennett. I believe that all the major world religions should be taught in our public school systems, not as fact, but here's what they are and what they believe. I think that's healthy. How many people who adhere to one faith know nothing about any of the others? I think, sure, let's teach them what Christianity is, who the Christian God is, who Allah is, what the Muslims believe. Let's give them the facts, and then as they grow up, we teach them critical thinking skills so that they can then determine what they believe for themselves. Yes?
I just want to say I'd be skeptical of prison conversions. If I was serving a sentence in prison, I thought that the prison powers perceiving me as being religious would lead to a couple of years knocked off. I'd accept Jesus within the first 2 weeks. in 6 months.
Work in the system.
Yes, sir.
I know that you've kind of bandied about the idea of doing this in your radio podcast, about the idea of talking about, because you came from a broadcasting background in contemporary Christian music, and you've talked about maybe doing something that has to do with the contemporary Christian music, world, and that kind of thing. I was wondering if you might talk about it briefly without giving too much away. I don't want you to
No, is everybody good for time?
It's about 8 o'clock.
You guys good?
Yeah, we're good.
I'm a little ahead of schedule then, aren't I? Good. Well, I have considered doing a story about my years in Christian radio, but it's such a big story that I don't know how to effectively tell it. A video will be hugely complicated to put together because we're talking about all these years and going back and finding the photos and putting them together. And then before I know it, will be a 20, 30 minute, 45 minute piece. Well, do I do just a podcast on it? Well, if I do just a podcast, the podcast has no visuals. It's kind of limiting. Do I write it? Do I do a blog on it? Do we put it in book form? I mean, I don't know what to do with it. But I'll share with you just a little bit if you would like. I started on the air. My very first radio gig was at 100.9 FM KXOJ Radio, Tulsa, Oklahoma. And my first shift was a 12-hour shift. We worked 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. on a show called The Gospel According to Music, and it was 12 hours commercial-free. And what we would do is once an hour, we didn't play commercial breaks, but what we did is we stopped the music once an hour to beg for money. We didn't call it begging for money. We called it asking for seeds to sow into the ministry of the gospel according to music so that we could be commercial-free 12 hours a night. Not thinking that most people would rather hear a 5, 7, 12-minute commercial stop set than to hear some yahoo on the radio stop and beg for money once an hour. But that's what we did. Christian music was in its infancy. I grew up with contemporary Christian music. Is there anybody here who came from that world?
I mean, I did a little bit. One of my favorite artists was Michael W. Smith.
Michael W. Smith, huge fan. Who?
Striper.
Striper. Remind me, I'll come back to Striper. I grew up in Tulsa at 31st and Garnett. They had a bookstore a long time ago called Tulsa Book and Supply. You couldn't buy Christian music at the major retail chains back then. Walmart, back then they had Peaches Records. Anybody remember Peaches? You couldn't find it. So you went to these little Christian nooks. They had Bibles, books, gifts, and Christian music. And they had just a few signature artists. And I grew up on this stuff. The Imperials. I'm forgiven. Now I have a reason for living. It's been almost 40 years. I can still sing the damn song. David Meese, Michael W. Smith, Amy Grant. Her first album released when she was 16 years old. And we felt really good about this music as I was growing up because it was a clean alternative to what we called secular music or devil music, the world's music, which was mostly about what? Getting laid. So as we were growing up, parents were like, oh, we've got this wonderful alternative. Now back then in the 80s and 90s, Christian music was a pale imitation of what rock radio and pop radio had done 1 year earlier. You could almost see the mirror. A great example is the 1985 or 6 Africa AIDS single called We Are the World. Michael Jackson and Diana Ross and Bruce Springsteen and Quincy Jones and all these major hard hitters went in and did this song. You guys remember that? Anybody old enough to remember We Are the World? They all went together and they all sang, there's a choice we're making, we're changing our own lives. They raised $20 million for the needy in Africa. Well, as a believer, who should have been a part of that? Who should have spearheaded that movement? The church. And so red-faced Christian artists went into the studio about 6 months later and recorded their own version of We Are the World called Do Something Now. It was put together by a guy named Steve Camp. And it was a very pale imitation. And, to their credit, they raised some money and gave. But it was obviously, it was a catch-up. We had a Christian version of almost every pop artist. For Joe Cocker, we had Phil Driscoll. For Sheena Easton, we had an artist named Sheila Walsh. Who's another great example? Taylor Dane, we had an artist named Kathy Tricoli. We seemed, and they would market them as such. Stevie Nicks, we had a girl named Leslie Phillips. And Leslie Phillips was pushed so hard into the cookie cutter of being like Stevie Nicks that she finally rebelled against the entire music industry, went off, changed her last name. Now she's, I forget her professional name now. She's an indie artist, still recording. And you want some weird trivia? If you ever rent the movie Die Hard 3, remember the girl wears all black, the assassin with the knife next to Jeremy Irons? That's Leslie Phillips from Christian Music. Talk about falling far from the tree, man. And then in about 93 or 94, the Christian music scene exploded. And major record labels like Sony and BMI, Columbia, Epic Records, I mean, all these record companies realized, hello, ka-ching. And they went in and bought up these mom and pop record labels that were proponents of Christian music. The Benson Records, the Sparrow Records, the Word Records. They bought them all up. They smelled money right off the bat. So now comes the big budgets, now comes the polish, now comes the bigger concerts, the bells and whistles, and before you know it, a lot of Christian artists are getting played on pop radio. Amy Grant got lots of pop airplay. Kathy Tricoli had a pop hit. Michael W. Smith had one called Place in This World. They played it for about 5 minutes, I think, on pop radio. Stryper had a crossover hit. I was second row at Stryper at the Old Lady on Brady, the Brady Theater in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Have you guys ever seen Stryper? They go to YouTube and type it in, Stryper, Stryper. And it defies description. But they were essentially the clean metal alternative. And they would go out and do concerts all around the country and around the world. And ultimately, I became disillusioned with Christian music in the late 90s, not because I don't believe that the people who were in the industry were true believers. I honestly think most of them were. They were just making their way, but they were flawed, fragile people like anybody else. Their lives were just as screwed up as everybody else. They just had a good airbrush artist. They were placed on stage in front of thousands of people every night. And I saw the money, and it really, it concerned me. I just thought, it's not that they're bad people. And I still miss a lot of the music. I love Third Day. I love me some Third Day. It's been years since I've been on Christian radio, and I love their sound. There's another band called Seventh Day Slumber. Love them. And there are days when I miss it. The audience, precious, fantastic, wonderful, compassionate, hardworking, just lovely people. And I get irritated with the atheist community sometimes. For those who never came from religion, the way they talk about Christians tells me that many of them either came from a very bad situation that does not reflect most of mainstream Christianity, or they're just disconnected from reality. These aren't bad people. They're not haters. They're not ignorant. They're not drooling, Neanderthals. They're real people, most likely raised in a Christian environment to Christian parents who've been doing it the same way their whole life. Gives them comfort. They teach it to their children, who then teach it to their children. But, if you were in a house fire, they'd be one of the first people to run in and grab you. They would be there for you in a pinch. And one fight I have made entering the atheist community in 2009 is there are times when I get good and pissed. There are times when I mock the dogma and the doctrine. But I'll tell you, I'm so tired of non-believers talking about the believer like they are subhuman. It's beneath us. They're people. And most of them are fantastic people. And we can find a way to educate. We can find a way to prove to them that we're not the monsters that the stereotype said that we were. Yes, sir?
Yeah, what we're looking at there is I wanted to make a point that a lot of people, so that people will not think that this is just a bias that you only see within the atheist community. It's actually a bias you see in every single community. For example, Stephen Fry did a talk on the power of language, involving how Germans were just absolutely normal people. It's just that over a long period of time, they took people that they disagreed with and made the language far more vile. They started treating them subhuman, less human, lesser than human. So they were the underman. They were not equal. And I think it's important that we note the power of language. And we're talking about anybody. It doesn't matter where they come from, be it Christianity, Islam, atheism. I think it's important that we note the difference, the people that we disagree with, and realize that they're human beings as well.
You and I can disagree vehemently about something. I mean, just almost to the point where we're just like about to come out of our chair. You feel that way about something? I feel that way about my former faith. Sometimes I just feel like, you got to be kidding me. I mean, I feel it, in my bones. But at no point do I think, they use the word on my forums sometimes and YouTube pages. There's nothing I can do about it. I don't suppress it. But I'm sorry, the word creatard, religitard, excuse me, these words should not be part of our vernacular. They just shouldn't. Growing up, I think one of the ways that my parents tried to keep us on the straight and narrow was to isolate us. And when you isolate other people and you don't know about them, you are able to presuppose a whole lot, right? If you don't really know what they're like. And honestly, we have no dialogue. I feel the same way about the abortion debate. People who say that if you're pro-choice, that you love aborting babies. Well, I know that's not accurate. I came from a pro-life environment, or an anti-abortion rather environment, if that's better for you. And honestly, the people I've met who are pro-choice are people who, quite frankly, are defending the rights of a woman to choose, but they wrestle with the subject of life. When does human life begin? And even in the atheist community, it's a very delicate subject. The people on the pro-choice side look at the anti-abortion side, and they think that they want to take away all of the rights of women. They hate women. That's not true. Not in mainstream Christian society, at least in this region, not even close. They believe that at the moment that the sperm and the egg get together and do their little thing, that a life begins, a soul is created, an eternal soul that must be protected. They are acting, male and female, father and mother, to protect life. They're acting to protect life. Not because they want to keep women at home and in the kitchen. Not because they believe that women are worth less than a man. Even if the scriptures posit that that is true, mainstream Christians don't live that way. Wives are career people. Wives raise children, yes, but I'll tell you, they are as valued, their opinions are as valued as the males are in most mainstream cultures. You will find exceptions everywhere, yes, but we don't understand each other. One thing I was telling Natalie on the drive up here, one thing I really want is to give people sort of a through the looking glass view of what Christian cultures and families are like, so that as we better understand what they're thinking, why they're thinking it, we can better approach them to maybe instigate some change, or at least stir up some fresh air through the cobwebs. I don't know, check me on that. I mean, do you think I'm wrong? Do you guys have something you'd like to add? Do you think we need to be harder? Do you think we need to be more mocking? Do you think we need to be softer? I saw a clip from Tyson and Dawkins on YouTube today. They were arguing about that very thing. What's the most effective approach? Yes, sir.
I think it depends on the situation, who you're talking to. For instance, if I'm having a conversation with an atheist, with a theist, and they have their view and I have mine, I'm a little bit more tender with them. If I'm talking about a politician, boom, I go full force. Guys.
Yeah, if you're going after Kent Hovind or somebody, or William Lane Craig or something, you're probably going to take a much harder tack. Sure. Yeah.
On Justin's point, I also think it's when you have someone who has the power to impose their views upon you, you need to take a different approach. If you're talking to a coworker or someone in your fellow community who doesn't have that level of power, then a softer approach would probably be more appropriate.
Was there a hand behind? Yes, sir.
Yeah, a friend of mine in the atheist community in Oklahoma City had made a comment within a thread about finding the similarities between two sides, a theist and an atheist could both be, let's take care of, tornado victims, let's, work for better schooling or better quality water, and all these things that we have in common that are positive that can bind us together and get positive action in the world. And I mean, there are times when we've got to defend when things are getting really wacko, but rather than being a defensive atheist on, guarding against the intrusion of the wacky theists, it's more comforting to me to look at the commonalities and get these people side by side and work on the things that really need to be done.
I know there are some people out there who, quite frankly, are sending and not receiving. You guys know the mannequin stare when you speak to them, right? It's that pathetic pity, that condescending look that says, "You poor disillusioned thing, you have no idea what the love of my God is like. If only you knew what I know." Those people, honestly, I think you're wasting your time. And I think there is a time to get in their face. I think there is a time to be forceful, and people misread me because I'm kind of a softie. If you've listened to my show, you realize that I'm kind of a softie. I want to laugh and share stories, and if we disagree, let's be cool about it. I don't need to get in somebody's face. I don't need to make you look stupid so that I can feel smart. I don't need that. I don't like people who walk around with their middle fingers out every day, flipping everybody off. I don't like people who say, "Religion made me this way." I understand carrying baggage with you, but we must take responsibility for how much control we give other people over how we feel. And we should be able to walk into a room and make an argument with confidence, with every confidence. We can make it passionately. We can raise our voices. We can even get a little heated. But at the end of the day, let's go have coffee. Let's go hang, it's good. It was a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for giving me 20 minutes. Thanks for listening to me. We'll always find people who are sending, not receiving, but I think the vast majority of human beings deserve more credit than we give them. Yes, sir?
I would just say, pretty much with what you prefaced, that attack arguments instead of the person itself, avoiding that element of attacks and attacking the points of contention and not the person themselves. And realizing that one of the things that we say is that we're a little different than you are, and I think something has to be upheld. I think we agree more than we disagree. And to that point, attack the arguments and not the person.
Now, have you guys experienced that if you attack the argument, many people especially will betray an insecurity about their argument and they will take offense? Right? If the Bible is here, right, and you're here and you're a religious person and I go after the Scripture, I'm looking here, but you take it personally. Now, I'm not a psychologist. I know there are probably a myriad of reasons that happens, but I suspect that people who are not confident in their own opinions and worldviews are usually the ones who are who froth at the mouth the most. If I'm in the room with someone who disagrees with me and I can't sit still, I've got to jump up. That doesn't say as much about them as it does about me. Yes, sir.
One thing I've learned from experience, I was with a friend of mine in Kansas. We were with his family. We had a family reunion. And they brought up the topic of the supernatural, ghosts, things of that nature. And I eased into the conversation, not on an attacking stance, but on an agreement stance, trying to basically distance myself from the topic, but also getting right in there. And interestingly enough, even though you take that stance, there's still only so far you could actually take that conversation, depending on the person. The people I had talked to, I had simply asked them, well, let's take into consideration you have somebody who is a skeptic. They doubt it, or they're not entirely sure. Do you feel that they're closed-minded even though they say they're not sure, or that they doubt it's the case? And they were like, yes, they're closed-minded, period, 100%. And I'm thinking that's the complete opposite, because you're the one being closed-minded by rejecting the fact that there's a possibility that this could not be true. And so it really depends on the person you're talking to.
I think we're playing chess, not checkers. The seeds of doubt were planted in my own life in 1996. I rejected my faith officially in 2008. I think we're planting seeds. You're not going to get someone doing a 180 right off the bat. That's just ridiculous. But I think if you create an environment where it's okay to start doubting and asking questions, you never know what those seeds will grow into. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I was reading an essay written by Brecht, who was the playwright, and they recently did a new performance of Galileo in New York, and that's what brought this all to my attention. He wrote in the essay titled "Writing the Truth, 5 Difficulties." In the opening paragraph, he said, "Nowadays, anyone who wishes to combat lies and ignorance and to write the truth must overcome 5 difficulties. He must have the courage to write the truth when truth is everywhere opposed, the keenness to recognize it, although it is everywhere concealed, the skill to manipulate it as a weapon, the judgment to select those in whose hands it will be effective, and the cunning to spread the truth among such persons."
You should totally be up here, because you're good. Thank you. Yes?
Well, you were talking about the amount of vitriol you have when you're trying to, share your viewpoint. Well, when Dawkins and Dennett were talking, right? Dennett is like Santa Claus, right? He's like a very nice, soft-spoken human being. Whereas Dawkins has, I think sometimes unfairly, but he's generally considered to be more vitriolic, right? Especially, his Ted Haggard interviews and stuff like that. But what Dennett said is that despite the fact that I have seriously tried to focus on espousing my viewpoint in a very nice way, I'm still accused of being arrogant and haughty and all these really negative things. The same things that Dawkins is accused of being. I saw him when he spoke at OU, and a guy stood up in the audience and freaked out and just started screaming at him for no reason, right? So what I want to know from you is, if being nice gets you accused of being arrogant by challenging someone's viewpoint, and being loud gets you accused of being arrogant, but I can tell you that everyone that I know is Christian knows who Richard Dawkins is, right? He rattled the cages harder, but we all know exactly who he is, but they don't know who Daniel Dennett is. We do, because we keep up with it. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think there's a difference between being soft or being nice and being weak. I honestly think Dawkins, despite the fact that he's a bulldog, seems like a genuinely good-humored guy. He seems like a really nice fellow. Christopher Hitchens did a debate with Rabbi Shmuley Boutiech at the 92nd Street Y in New York in 2008. All 90 minutes of it are on YouTube. It's well worth your time. Now, he and the rabbi went head-to-head for 90 minutes. And you guys have seen Hitchens at work, right? An easy, confident, barely raised his voice. And when he does, it's only for punctuation, right? He owned it. But at no point did he lose his cool. At no point was he anything other than a gentleman. He came in and he owned it. He was strong. But he wasn't... When I talk about being a bulldog, I'm talking about people who are repellent. They walk into a room and they are on such an extreme offense. They are shouting, they are not speaking, they are angry to the point of raising real red flags for all the rest of us. It means they need to deal with some other stuff. They're not, in my opinion, effective ambassadors for the truth, for facts, for science, because they repel so many people and they're so polarizing. Now, granted, they're always going to tell us we're rudderless, we have no morals because we don't believe in Jesus, and we're deceived, and they're going to associate evolution with atheism, and then they're going to go down that road, and they're going to talk about how Hitler was a believer in Darwin, and oh God, and you're going to find your head pop off. They're always going to say what they say. I can't control that, but I sure can control how I walk into a room and how I present myself. There was one over here real fast. I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
So oftentimes in a church setting, somebody will give their testimony as to how they were, quote unquote, saved. So what was your cornerstone? You said that your seeds were planted in 1996. What was the context for that?
When was I saved, or when did I start to doubt?
Doubt is what I mean. Yeah.
Did you want to know about my salvation experience when I was a kid, or when did I start to doubt?
When did you become sort of an atheist? And have that term?
That happened in 1996. I think.
Yeah.
What was the context, the story behind it?
I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version if you want to hear it. In 1996, there was an artist named Rich Mullins, beloved by the Christian music community. He sang a song, "Our God is an Awesome God." It's still sung all over the world in church services and in concerts. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above. You guys know it? With wisdom, power, and love. Yeah. And he was this very organic, earthy kind of dude. He was just real down to earth, and people loved that about him. And he did a concert in Tulsa 6 months, I think, before the accident. He was in a Jeep with his songwriting partner and buddy, Mitch McVicker. Neither one of them have a seatbelt on. They're on a highway. I want to say it was in New Mexico. I can't remember for sure. Something happens and the Jeep turns over and they're both ejected from the vehicle. Rich Mullins was thrown into the middle of the highway and a semi-truck comes over the hill. His body is rendered unrecognizable. Okay? And I was at a concert. They do an event in BA called Rooster Days. And there was some kind of a concert that we had that one night. And people started to come up to me and go, hey, Rich Mullins died. You hear? Rich Mullins? And of course, I was MC and I was the morning show host there representing the station. I hadn't heard a thing. Really? When? What happened? No, I'm sure it's not true. And 5 minutes later, I heard Rich Mullins is dead. What happened? Did anybody know anything? And now you start to get that where there's smoke, there's fire thing, right? Enough people are coming up to you. You're thinking, oh no. And we got the information that he had been killed. And my co-host and I rushed up to the radio station, which was located in the Cityplex Towers. And we went on the radio at about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. And we made an announcement to our listeners that Rich Mullins was dead. And it was just heartbreaking. You know, Jim was crying and I had very rudimentary website building skills, but I was the web guy. You know, I had just enough information to know how to get something up there. And so it was on me to put together a tribute very fast. We had to get something on the homepage. And so I grabbed a black and white photograph of Rich Mullins, and I put it on the homepage, and I put the words, "Welcome home, Rich," and a quick memorial to him. He will be missed. We know he's in a better place. I don't even know what I wrote. And I'll tell you, as I typed it and posted, I felt like I was being deceptive. I can't really describe it. I just thought, excuse me? And I put it up because we were giving each other comfort. But it was the very first time I felt that ringing bell of that red flag that, hello, something's wrong, you know? Something's wrong here. And I had a chance to think about it over the next several days. We did a memorial show the following morning, and people are calling up, talking about him. And of course, you know how we tend to deify the dead, right? It was almost John Lennon-esque. It was how, you know, we talked about he was all these things. He was so inspirational to us. We know that God called him home to a better place. We know that we will be reunited. As we enter heaven, he'll be there at the pearly gates, and we'll all sing Awesome God together, and it's going to be amazing. And of course, the whole time, under the surface, I'm dealing. I'm sorry. God's master plan was to put this man in front of millions of people all around the world as his beloved ambassador, spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ, cultivating his life and his talent, his family, his friends, everything that he was and is, so that his life could end by being pulverized on a highway in the middle of the night. And his mother has to endure a closed casket and send the entire Christian community into a state of shock and mourning so that God could be given the glory. This was his divine master plan. I could not jive with it. And I tell you, that ate away at me for years. And then after 9/11, I was on the air. As long as we're having a moment here, I might as well share my 9/11 story very quickly. I was on the air at a Clear Channel radio station. Clear Channel had a Christian station for about a year and a half called Live 101.5. We played edgier music. We were going up against KXOJ, and I was on the air. And somebody walked into the room and said, "A plane just hit the World Trade Center. Did you hear?" And I'm probably like you. I was thinking, well, it was a Cessna, right? Some rogue dude out there. It was, you know, something happened, some crazy freak accident. And all of a sudden, the second plane hit. And we're seeing the news reports come in, and I can see we had a place called Studio Row where all the radio stations were lined up side by side. And at the traffic department down the other way, I mean, traffic was not like traffic, like news traffic. It was the office where they would schedule all the commercial breaks. There was a room of about 5 ladies who worked in this office. And they came into my studio weeping. And I mean, you know, I didn't know them all that well, but they came to me because I was the Christian. And they said, they're crying, they said, "Please pray for us, please. We're scared, we're terrified, please pray." Because everybody thought, who's next, right? Where's the plane going to hit next? Who's going to get bombed next? We're being attacked by the Muslims, right? It's an attack of Satan. Who knows what they were saying. It was just this weird feeling of vulnerability. And so we all stood in a circle, right? Computers run the show, so I mean, I'm running a long segue of music, and we all stood in a circle, and we all joined hands, and I don't even remember what I said. I'm sure it was something along the lines of, you know, "Dear God, please protect us from the evil one, and please give us strength and comfort. Be with the rescue workers as they go into the tower," and I mean, I don't know, typical stuff that you would hear. And we said amen, and they all hugged me, and they all left the room. And I remember thinking, almost said it out loud. I sat in the chair, almost said it out loud. We are kidding ourselves. Those words stick with me now. We're kidding ourselves. This was not a God or a Satan event. This was human action and reaction. And from what I could see, religion was the problem. And those two events were the catalyst for me over the course of the years. Then I did the ambivalent thing where you just don't deal with it. Whatever. I'm not going to, whatever. And then as I approached 40, have you noticed that when you come close to 40, your bullshit meters just goes like this? You just go, life's too short. I don't have to put up with this. I hit 38. I was like, life is too short. What am I bound down to everybody? Why don't I ask the hard questions? How come I've got to appease everybody else? I'm sure when I'm 60, I'm going to be a real son of a bitch. And I started asking hard questions. And as I asked the questions, I noticed that the answers I got back were ridiculous. They were ridiculous. I'd never heard of Richard Dawkins, never heard of Daniel Dennett, never heard of Sam Harris, right? Introduced to them for the first time when I was 36, 37, and I devoured their books. First time I'd ever heard a contrary opinion to what I had been raised with. First time ever. And you know what? I was reading the stuff. Charles Templeton was an I'm rambling, forgive me. I get excited. Charles Templeton was an evangelist, an associate of Billy Graham. They were college roommates, as I understand it. He was the Canadian version of Billy Graham. He was a true believer. He was like Dan Barker. Preached the message of Jesus Christ everywhere he went. I doubt they talk like that in Canada, but I do that when I'm doing my preaching. And he got to the point where I got, where it's like, this makes no sense. And he wrote a book called Farewell to God. It was the first book of its kind I had ever written, and I burned through it. I couldn't put it down. I couldn't put it down. It was like hearing the voice in my own head. He went through the Noah's Ark story. Yes. A floating zoo. Penguins on the ark with camels in the desert after they walked 8,000 miles, and the guy who ran it was 600 years old, and 8 people who were half a millennium old shoveled tons of daily waste out of a single window in a stadium-sized craft that floated around and landed on a boat, and then practiced incest to produce all 5,000 ethnic groups. We see only 3,000, 4,000. I mean, I was reading it going, yes! And he was a Christian. He was one of my ilk. He came with credibility. And I moved from that to the God Delusion, and then on to another series of books, and my family freaked. They thought, midlife, right? I'm 38. Midlife. You know what's next? It's going to be the convertible. It's going to be it's going to be something. He's going to do something crazy. This is just a phase. Anybody heard they're going through a phase? My phase is going on 4 or 5 years now, and I don't see any signs of it waning. It doesn't feel like a phase to me. It feels like I was introduced to answers that made more sense, and I sponged them up. And Matt Dillahunty once said that many of the most effective champions for atheism or for rationale, for free thought, whatever you want to call it, are people who were once religious. And that's why I do what I do. Look, I'm no scientist. I'm no philosopher. I'm an ex-radio guy with expensive toys. I make videos. I smart off. I do radio. I connect with other people. I'm just a guy. My opinion's no more valid than yours. But more than anything else, at the end of the day, I want my experience as a believer, indoctrinated as a child, and clawing my way out to what I consider to be rationality, to be something that fewer people have to do tomorrow. And fewer people have to do the day after that. And fewer people have to do the day after that. Did you know that people under the age of 30 are twice as likely today to reject any deity as they were in 1990? Atheism, non-belief, non-religious is the single fastest growing demographic in America right now. And it's skyrocketing. Like close to 9 million new apostates every single year. We got the Reason Rally coming up in just a week and a half in Washington, D.C. We've got skepticism, pro-science, and pro-atheism books that are screaming through the bestseller lists. We have people who are becoming less and less afraid by their families and their communities and their cultures to speak out when things look ridiculous. Imagine what our world is going to look like in another 10 years. Wouldn't it be nice if somebody born in 2020 wasn't programmed to fear hell, to fear that his skin would be roasted from his bones if he doesn't buy it, if he has doubts. And he can be taught critical thinking skills so that he can one day develop a worldview of his own. That's all I really want in this world. And at the end of my life, if they say I had a hand in that, I would be a very, very happy person.